Whenever I'm hiring someone, I want to know that this person is always going to be on a continuous learning mode. So that is a great trait to have when you look for someone that might be promotable. How are they always in the mindset of continuous learning?
Welcome to the Promoted with Denise Harris podcast. I'm your host, Denise Harris, and today we are talking to Valencia McClure. Now, Valencia is the Vice President of Governmental and External Affairs and President of the Pepco Region, responsible for shaping, leading, and executing external affairs, strategies, and programs in support of Pepco and Pepco Holdings. Welcome, Valencia.
Welcome. Thank you so much for having me today, Denise.
Oh, it's my pleasure. You know, at the Promoted with Denise Harris podcast, we talk about navigating our careers. We have impactful conversations about how you stand out and, of course, how you get promoted. So I'm really looking forward to having this conversation with you today.
Thank you. You know, I wish when I had started my career early on that there were podcasts such as what you're doing now, because I think it's so beneficial for women up today. No matter what stage you're at in your career, you always need the type of advice that you're giving by the women that you're talking to and just hearing their stories, their strategies, what works, what doesn't work, what to look out for. It's just so inspiring and empowering. So thank you for what you do.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm glad to be doing it. I wish we had it as well, but I think, this is important. It's crucial. And, the goal here is to see women elevate their career and have everything that they need to do it successfully and joyfully.
Yes, exactly.
Perfect. So, Valencia, let's go ahead and jump in because I have a lot of things I want to pick your brain about. You've had an extraordinary journey from top-level corporate executive to successful entrepreneur, and now president of Pepco Region. Can you share with us some key moments and decisions that helped to shape your career trajectory?
It's interesting because when you start your career early on, you have, I think, ideas in your head of where you want to go. But for me, I never envisioned when I started that I would reach the level of where I am today. I was always a hard worker. So I think, one, I was always committed to the job that I was doing. I was committed and I was a hard worker and always wanted to excel. So I was never a kind of status quo. I was always looking to, okay, how can I take this to the next level? How can I move to the next level? Not knowing what the next level even looked like at that time. So I would say one constant has always been hard work. Two has always been, how can I make the company and my department even better than what it is today? So I always reached outside of my realm of even the scope of work that I was doing. And I do that today. I think that's important for anybody, is to be able to, how do you ensure excellence in the work that you're doing? And how do you put yourself out there to be able to support the company in a more broader fashion? And how do you take additional responsibilities that may not be part of your current role? And I think that has been something that has helped me to continue to climb and also to get the notice of executives that helped to put me, I would say, on a trajectory that I didn't even know I was setting for myself at the time. And that's something I always tell people, anyone that I'm mentoring, raise your hand to ask for the company-wide initiatives that might be taking place. Raise your hand to take on additional responsibility that's going to have the eye of leaders, because that helps to get you noticed and that helps to really differentiate what you might be doing from the next person.
Yeah, that exposure and that visibility. And as you say, differentiating yourself, really in a way, standing out.
Yes.
I'm interested to hear a little bit about, your strategy as you navigated through the corporate ladder, because I imagine that there had to be some sense of developing your brand. I mean, I know you said you didn't start out that way, but you didn't get to be president of a large organization yesterday. So there had to be some things that were aligned with developing a personal brand for yourself. I mean, is that true? And can you talk a little bit about that?
It is true. And it's interesting because at the time I was doing it, I didn't know I was creating a brand. Because I would say probably the whole personal brand became more prevalent in the last maybe 10, 15 years. We started hearing about this. So when I first started, I just knew that for me, I wanted to, when people met me or heard my name, I wanted to ensure that they first heard someone who's professional, someone who has great work etiquette, someone who is a team leader. So there were certain characteristics that personally was very important to me. What I didn't realize is that it was creating a brand for myself as I moved up from job to job or company to company. Once I hit a director role, that's when it hit me, I think, more of I am developing a brand for myself, because at that point, you have other women in the organization that are looking at you that you don't even realize are there watching how you do your work, how you navigate within the corporate world, how you navigate the internal politics, how you do your job. So that in itself started putting a different onus on me of ensuring that I am creating the right brand for myself, because your brand speaks for you before people even meet you. How many times do you meet someone and they will say, "Oh, you're such and such. I have heard so much about you. I have heard that you're this, you're that, you're this, you're that." So it's so critical to make sure that you're setting the right brand. I think the type of work that I'm in, because I was always on that external facing, every job I've had has always been external facing with stakeholders. So it was so important to make sure that I was setting the right reputation, the right representation for myself and for my company as well. And so I think that really shaped me being, again, creating a brand without knowing that I was creating a brand until I got a little higher in the ranks. And then I became very intentional about the brand I was building for myself. And that's something when I mentor women, I always tell them it's important the way you dress, the way you show up, the way you communicate, not only internally, but externally. You are a representation of the company. And it is critical that you are building the right brand for yourself, because you want that brand to speak for you when you're not.
Yeah. And Valencia, it's interesting because I think that the reputation actually is the foundation for the brand.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And the thing about reputation is it's not necessarily what you think about yourself, but instead it's really about how others see you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I always tell people, you want to ensure, one, that you are creating your own narrative and that someone else is not writing the narrative for you.
Yes.
If someone else writes the narrative for you, then it's a lot of hard work to turn that narrative around. And so that's where that personal brand is very important. And the brand encompasses so much, because it encompasses how you do your work, how you work with others, the level of work that you put out, in addition to the whole leadership presence, your expertise in certain areas. That's all part of the brand as well. But if you are not articulating your narrative and your brand, someone else is going to do it for you. And that's what you don't want. So it's so important to put a lot of time and attention and be intentional about creating the right personal brand and narrative for yourself.
Yeah, that's a really good segue to my next question, because essentially you're saying take control of your brand and you need to be the one articulating what that is. But what about when it comes to advocating for yourself in the workplace? So many of my executive coaching clients, talk about, well, I don't want to sound like I'm being boastful. I don't want to sound like, I'm bragging. But the reality is that, yeah, you need to let folks in the organization know what the contributions are that you're making. And I imagine too, that it's also about how well your team is performing. Like sometimes we don't need to go out there with a big sign, because people can see your efforts. They can see the contributions you're making just through the results of what you and your team are accomplishing.
Oh, you hit on something so important. And it took me a while to even realize this, but the mark of a good leader is really representative of how well the team is doing. Because if you have a leader that an individual, I will say that maybe they're knocking it out the park and everybody loves them. But if their team is not performing, then there's a big disconnect. So I always say, when you advocate for yourself, if you advocate for your team, that in itself is going to give you the visibility and recognition that you need. So it's almost a different change of mindset. I feel like when I first started being a leader manager early on to what a leader is about today, to me, it's two totally different things. Being a leader is obviously you want to build a high performing team. And I tell the directors on my team all the time, we want to build a team that every other leader is trying to take people from our team.
Yes.
That's when you know you're doing a good job. When people are trying to poach your employees from your team, that to me is the biggest compliment that anybody could ever give me. And so the more that you can create it, well, the more you can empower and create opportunities for your team, create visibility, exposure for your team, and really highlight the team's accomplishments, that will speak for who you are as a leader. And that gets you more, to me, recognition than even if you talked about what your own personal success is within the company. So that is a little bit of a different, I would say, mindset and focus. Also, it's critical, and this is, I preach this all the time to the team. It's one thing to say, I did this or I did that, or we were successful. But if you can't tie it back to the company's goals and really what is the measurable impact to what you are doing as a team to the company, then you can kind of talk all day long and no one's going to listen. So that's always the important thing. Tie it back to the company's goals. You can have all the great relationships in the world, but if those relationships do not somehow impact the organization, then those are just relationships. It doesn't mean anything. And so always something that people have a hard time of being able to say, I did XYZ project successfully, but if you can't connect the dots on the why, one, the strategy, so talk about the strategy, why you even did what you did, and then the impact back to the company. If you can do that successfully, that will start to get you the visibility and recognition that you need as a leader. And that's when you are seen as a good leader. Build those high performing teams, but tie the successes directly back to the company.
And it's a practice, right? I mean, you got to keep doing it.
Yeah,
It's not a one and done thing.
Right.
It's constant practice. I think it's also about really having a vision of where you want to be within the organization and tying your behaviors, your competencies, the contributions that you're making to that vision, and then being able to articulate that.
Yes, and intentional, right? So you have to be intentional around, and you're right. First, you have to set your goal. Then you have to be intentional, set your strategy, and then how are you going about really executing on that strategy? Because you can be busy, and that's why I always tell the team, we don't want to be busy for the sake of busy, because you busyness yourself, but then it has no real impact. How is what you're doing having the real impact? So you have to have clear strategy and be intentional on executing, and always tie back to the company's priorities and the bottom line and the goals of the company. And that's where some people do miss the mark, because they will focus so much on a project, a one-off, but how do these projects connect the dots to then our priorities as a company?
And keeping the big picture in mind at all times. So, Valencia, there's a lot of talk around the fact that women are less likely to have influential sponsors advocating for them in closed doors promotion discussions. Can you talk a little bit about how important it is for women to seek out sponsors and mentors, and particularly as you elevate to these senior level positions?
Yeah. So, it's very important. And I think, early on, we always heard mentors. And then we learned that, okay, wait a minute, there's a difference between a mentor and a sponsor. Mentors are great to have. And I always tell people, if you can organically find a mentor, that's to me the best type of partnership, because you really want someone that feels committed to your growth, to your success, that is very comfortable with giving you real-time feedback. it's good or bad. And that to me makes the best mentoring partnerships. Now, a sponsorship is something totally different. That sponsor is someone, and your mentor can sometimes be your sponsor, but that sponsor is someone who has influenced themselves in the company. And then that sponsor is the one who is advocating on your behalf behind closed doors. Your sponsor may be someone who never even gives you advice, but they are watching you, they're aware of your work, and they're advocating on your behalf. The mentor can't always do what a sponsor does. A mentor could be anybody. They may not have influence within a company, but they can still give you the feedback that's very valuable. The sponsor helps to when conversations are happening about who might be the right person for a specific position, who might be a person we want to put through a leadership growth development class. Who should we recommend to lead a company-wide initiative? That sponsor can be in that room who then is advocating on your behalf and can open doors that maybe a mentor or even sometimes your manager may not be able to do. So it is very critical to have a sponsor. Unfortunately, women don't always have sponsors. People of color don't always have sponsors. And part of that is because people of color have not always been the ones behind closed doors when the conversations are happening. Now we're seeing more of us, more women, part of those conversations. So that opens the doors for more women to have sponsors than what we've seen in the past. But it's critical. It's critical. And I always say it's not always, you can ask someone to be your mentor, but you can't always ask someone to be your sponsor. So the sponsor typically chooses you. So that's where, and that sometimes a lot of it is how you stand out, your brand, that goes back to your brand, goes back to executive presence, goes back to having the right visibility, exposure within a company for someone of influence to be able to then pick you to and watch you and then to really advocate for you behind the closed doors.
Yeah. Thank you so much for clarifying the differences between sponsor and mentors. And to go back to your point, oftentimes sponsors are selecting those individuals who they want to sponsor, right? Who they want to have stand out and talk about, the contributions or the milestones that the individual has made. Some organizations will take the initiative and sort of give you a sponsor, assign a sponsor. I know there's lots of large organizations that do that. But when you don't have that opportunity to get that visibility or have someone create that relationship for you, do you have any tips for someone who, let's say, is at the director level, doing a phenomenal job, knocking it out the park, meeting and exceeding the goals and objectives within the organization, developing great relationships with stakeholders? What is some advice for that person who may be at the director level, who wants a sponsor, needs a sponsor, but for whatever the reason, just hasn't been able to make that connection?
I say an easy way sometimes to do it is to be able to, I always advise people, schedule one-on-ones with leaders in the company. 9 times out of 10, a leader will never deny meeting with someone. If you are asking for 30 minutes of someone's time just to make an introduction of who you are, to meet them, to learn more about their background. Typically, let's say if you meet with 5 individuals within the company, if you're making the right impact and being very intentional about those one-on-ones, you may end up with a sponsor just by having the pure one-on-ones. I admit, so there's so many employees I know within our company. We're fortunate because we have our employee resource groups. That's either for women, for African Americans, for Latinos, every background. We have an employee resource group. And then we also have mentoring match. So we do match employees with leaders for mentorship. So with all the opportunities, there's a lot of opportunities then for someone to be able to catch the eye of a leader and to be able to say, wow, this person is really standing out above the crowd. But then in addition to that, I do a lot of one-on-ones. So I have employees all the time that I will meet at some of our functions and they will say, hey, can I get some time on your calendar? And I'm one of those, I will never deny meeting with an employee. And what I always look for when I meet with employees, who's coming in that is really prepared for the meeting, has done their research, they've researched my background, they're able to tell me about their background, what their goals are, what they hope to achieve, asking how can I support them, knowing clearly how I might be able to support them in their endeavors. And then every now and then one stands out in the midst. And then I will end up starting to kind of follow their career. And so when I have the opportunity to advocate, I will do so. So to me, that's like the perfect opportunity. And,
I love that.
You may not even just do it with people within your company. You could do it with even other leaders that are in other companies that you might meet at an event or through volunteer work, what have you. So never be afraid to ask for a one-on-one with the leader, because you don't know where that relationship can turn.
Absolutely. I love that. And I think the operative words there is never be afraid. Like,
Right.
that's the thing. When you want to get promoted, you got to do things that take you outside of your comfort zone, no doubt, right? I mean, you have to be able to stand out. You have to be unafraid of having these conversations. You have to be prepared. You have to be ready, because it makes a difference between staying in the position that you're in or really elevating.
And as leaders, we look for the people that really kind of feel like they take risks.
Yeah.
They're not afraid. They're not afraid of being vulnerable. I love when I'm in a meeting with someone and someone will say, you know what, let me ask this one question because I'm not quite sure about XYZ and I want to learn more. I love when I hear people say that, because a lot of times everyone feels like they have to come to the table knowing it all. And we don't know it all. We're always going to be
impossible to know everything.
Right. Exactly. And so I love when people are authentic and being able to say, wow, I need to learn more about XYZ that we're trying to do within the company, and reaching out to individuals within the company that might be subject matter experts so they can learn. You always, to me, want to have a spirit of continuous learning and growth opportunity. That to me is a very admirable trait, because whenever I'm hiring someone, I want to know that this person is always going to be on a continuous learning mode of what we don't know currently, because there's always something new that's coming out, and there's always a better way of doing what we're currently doing. 100%. So that is a great trait to have when you look for someone that might be promotable. How are they always in the mindset of continuous learning?
Yeah, continuous learning and continuous growth and development.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So, Valencia, let's talk a little bit about some stats.
Okay.
All right, because I did a little research before you and I had this conversation, and here's what I found. C-suite representation increased from 17% in 2015 to 29% in 2024 for women. Vice president roles saw women's representation grow from 27% in 2015, a decade later in 2024, to 34%. So, in your opinion, what are the biggest barriers preventing women from reaching executive positions, and what practical steps can they take to overcome those barriers?
Yeah, so I would say one barrier we talked about is probably not having a sponsor, because when you hit a certain level, you really do need a sponsor. So that's definitely one barrier. Sometimes I think women still have a hard time of really advocating their strength within a company, their impact within a company. We talked a little bit about that earlier too, and that comes to how are you building that high performing team? How are you stepping out perhaps of the shell within your department and making sure that you're reaching across all departments? We like to always say the interconnectedness. How are you interconnecting with your peer? And I look at it as interconnecting up, interconnecting across, and interconnecting down as well. You have to have your group of people on all different levels. But there are parallel steps that you have to do. And a lot of it comes to the advocating, the sponsor, your internal networks. Are they the right internal networks? You can have an internal network, but it may not be the right internal net. Are you networking with people of influence within your company as well? And then how do you use your external stakeholder support to be able to help what you're trying to do even internally? And fortunately, the nature of my job, that's all the nature of my job. A lot of it is all external stakeholders. So that's always been a benefit to me. And then how do you use those external stakeholders to support what you are trying to do within the company with the company priorities as well? That starts to be very measurable impact that is clear across the company. And then how do we show up with our executive presence? And that's always a question, what does that mean? I think it's for each person. The bottom line of it, I think a lot of executive presence is having the right type of confidence. It's confidence, it's a mindset, it's giving people, other leaders, the confidence that you can handle any challenge that might come your way. Because it's not to say we're going to win every battle, but how do you respond when you don't win the battle? How do you respond when you're in challenges? Because you need to be able to give people the comfortability that you can accept greater challenges and you can handle them. You have the mindset and the skills that to be able to do that as well.
Yeah, mindset is so much of everything we do. In my last episode, I talked to Julia Pimsleur, Julia, and she came on and just really honed in on the importance of mindset. But I think the other thing that sometimes creates a barrier is that women typically have less powerful networks, which reduces their access to insider information and also social ties that are crucial for promotion. So let's talk a little bit about the significance of developing a network. Like, I don't know. I mean, I think it's network. I think it's relationship, but it's also getting yourself out there. And today our lives are so busy, whether it's, family and, parents or whatever else, the job itself, whatever else we're doing. But I think there's a misstep that women in particular make when we don't get out there and attend these conferences, attend these meetings, participate in trade organizations, take on positions that have responsibility and visibility outside of your organization. So from your perspective, can you talk a little bit about how important is it to develop this network? And what are some things that we should be paying attention to as we start developing networks?
So networking, I would have to say, and I probably should have mentioned it even earlier, has been one of the most valuable tools for my success. So I had the fortune of early on in my career working for a woman who probably was one of the best networkers I've ever seen. And when I say network is more than just meeting someone. So I always say there's a couple of steps in being successful. First, and people will laugh a lot of times when I talk about networking, but networking is very strategic in its own self. So if you're attending a conference, I will always, and this is, I probably gotten not as strong in my later years because I feel, as I have kind of been promoted as I did when I was growing up the ranks, climbing up the ranks. But if I knew I was attending a conference, I would get a list of the conference attendees. I would find out who on that list is attending that I want to make sure I am meeting while I am there at the conference. What is my elevator speech, as everybody says? Why am I even attending this conference? What do I hope to get out of the conference? And then when I'm meeting individuals, so I was very strategic about, and when I say strategic, it's not in a bad way because it was still very authentic and genuine. But it was people that I wanted to meet either from a personal perspective or professional perspective. But then also meeting is the first step of it. So how do you keep the relationship going once you've met someone? So when you meet someone, you're having conversations, you're always looking for what's the common ground here? What's the common ground? What do we have in common? What is our personal connection? I'm listening to hear what they're interested in. So when I leave that conversation and I'm back in my office, and now, of course, you can connect via LinkedIn. Before, it was literally sending cards saying it was so great to meet you. Enjoyed talking about XYZ. Now, still to this day, certain connections that I make, I will still do that handwritten card. I'm a big card person. So I'll still do the handwritten card. And then, of course, back in the day, if I heard they were interested in, I'm just going to say dogs. If I saw an article on dogs, I'd cut that article out of the newspaper, send it, say, hey, I saw this article. I remember you said you really enjoyed XYZ. Send that right on over to them. That keeps you on their mind. So the next time you see them, now all of a sudden it's a greater connection than someone you met perhaps 6 months ago and you haven't heard from them since. Now, of course, it's a lot easier because you have all the digital platforms. So through LinkedIn, still the same way. If you see an article on LinkedIn, it might be of interest to someone, you send that article to them, say, hey, I was thinking about you when I read this article, XYZ. So there's numbers of ways to keep in touch. So you really have to kind of figure out what is your flow, because networking is not just meeting someone. It really is, how do you develop a real relationship with this person so you can start creating perhaps a network, or by meeting one person, developing a relationship, it helps you then to meet other people within their network as well. And it just continues to go. So I say networking is one of the most powerful that you can do. You want to diversify your network. So when it comes to industry associations, volunteering is one of the best things you can do. Serving on boards is a great way to kind of meet a diverse network that perhaps isn't all tied to your industry, but these are community leaders that then you're building relationships with community leaders that you never know how that might impact or help your career as well. So it takes work, it takes time, but it is one of the most powerful tools that you can do for your career.
I agree with you. And listen, you and I are an example of that.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
I mean, we met a few years ago in New York, right? I mean, it's part of the Dollar Women community, and we hit it off. And, when you had your business with the artistry of essential oils, we talked about that. We did some connection there. And then you are back in the area here in Washington, D.C. We've been able to connect. And that's why you were one of my top 5 people that I said, I got to have on this podcast immediately because of what I know of you and the relationship that you and I have built together. So, Valencia, as we land this plane, what are 3 things that you think help make someone promotable?
Yeah, so that's hard because I always have, I like to say so many.
I know you got 10, but I just need 3 for today, Valencia. You can come back again.
When I narrow it down to 3, I would say first is executive presence, right? Because your presence is what really will draw people to you. So executive presence, no doubt. And that's your confidence, leadership skill, all of that. Strategic positioning. And so when I say strategic positioning, it's really, how are you driving company outcomes? How are you taking on new initiatives within the company to drive priorities within the company? How are you creating your own initiatives within the company? Let's say the initiatives don't exist. You can create your own. If you see there's a gap within the company, I do it all the time. If I see there's a gap, I will step right in there and create an initiative to fill that gap. So that's strategic positioning. And then how are you creating influence and impact for the company? So I would say those are the top 3. You can do great work all day long, but if it is not having impact on the company, it's just good work. So you really have to be strategic and trying to define what is the impact and being able to communicate the impact back to leaders of what this initiative is that you're doing. So executive presence, strategic positioning, and influence and impact on the company.
Wow. Thank you so much. I think those 3 things alone will make a huge impact. And before you leave us, any good books that you're reading?
Yeah. So I'm a book lover.
I know you are, as I.
And so one of my favorite books is Next Level. So it is so, yes.
Got it right here. Okay. For those.
That is one of the best books for leaders, and especially when you're trying to go to the next level. So I continually read that book.
So The Next Level by Scott Eblin.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. Got it. And then my other favorite, and this was one I read early on and I've come back to it again, but it's The 12 Absolutes of Leadership. This is another really great book, and it's by Gary Burmison. He's CEO of Korn Ferry, and Korn Ferry is one of the top national recruitment companies in the country. And
executive recruitment companies.
Yes, exactly. Right? And specific for executive. And so just a lot of great reminders really on how to be a good leader, how to lead a high performing team, take the risk, don't be afraid of failure, but great tips within this book. And another book I always say for new leaders is The First 90 Days.
Oh, that's the Bible. The first 90 days, you can't do a transition and be successful transitioning from one position to the next, whether you're getting promoted to VP, CEO, running an organization, relocating to take over a different company in a different region or anywhere in the globe, and not have The First 90 Days by Michael Watkins. It's one of my favorites, and it's probably one of the books I've gifted the most.
Yes, it truly is, because so many people, and we see it, if you are transitioning into a new role, you can either make or break yourself by what you do in those first 90 days. And so a lot of people, sometimes people think they're supposed to go in and make these dramatic changes instead of using that time to listen to your team, listen to other leaders,
start wins for yourself.
Exactly. Assess your team. You want some early wins, but you don't have to do dramatic changes without truly first understanding the organization. But it is such a great, and I'm a year and a half into this specific position, but I'll still go back and read just to kind of pick up, make sure, okay, did I follow my blueprint? And here's the other thing is to also not just read the book, but create your 90-day plan. I created a 30-day plan, 60-day plan, 90-day plan when I came into this position. And a lot of people don't create the roadmap of what they want to accomplish in those 90 days. And that is critical as well, too.
It certainly is. Well, Valencia, thank you so much. You have been phenomenal today with all of these tips and guidelines. I really, really appreciate it. So many gems that anyone can take and sit down and create the plan for themselves and really be successful and get promoted. Now, we hope that you will be a friend of our show and come back and visit us and give us some more tips and help us as we continue to have these impactful conversations. So thank you so much for coming out today, Valencia. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Denise. Happy to come anytime. Thank you so much. And again, congratulations on all the great work that you're doing to empower women and to help women to get to that next level and become promotable. We always need it. We never stop learning.
Well, thank you. And thank you to our listeners. And I will see you next time on the next episode of Promoted with Denise Harris.